this is basically a spectacular rise from something that was nothing just 4 years ago.
No, evening, Mark. You're correct there, as you've shown on the chart. I've actually updated it since the kind of the blog that I published there. And you're right, we're not going to be below 50,000. The numbers that we've had for August so far are pretty much double what we saw last year, Mark. And if that continues for the rest of the year, we're going to smash through the 50,000 barrier. And we'll see more kind of migrants kind of across the channel in 2022 than in all the years previously, you know, going right to the year dot, because the government are trying to talk about a plan to get this under control. It's clearly way out of control. Now, the Home Office next week will publish some more stats on kind of the latest quarter's figures in terms of where the people are coming from. Because remember, Mark, we had that intelligence recently that some of the Albanians might be making up a lot of the numbers as well, which we know obviously aren't fleeing kind of a war, because we haven't had one there for a while.
Well, how come they're that specific, the numbers? You break it down. It's, I think with the exception of Albania, it's basically all Middle Eastern and Asian. And you break it down all the way to sort of 1% of them are from Sri Lanka. Who actually records that, given that a lot of these people just arrive with no documentation whatsoever on them?
Yeah, so this is from the Home Office figures. So we get daily every day now, Mark, how many people are coming across in the boats. And then the Home Office will then compile every quarter a set of statistics. So we get the latest ones the back end of next week for the kind of the latest quarter. So this one that we're talking about here kind of covers more in the earlier part of the year. But you're right, I write in the blog that it can be difficult to ascertain some of this information because obviously documentation is thrown overboard. So it's difficult always to try and find out exactly where these people are coming from. But remember, you know, we've seen this huge explosion in numbers since kind of February. And it was around £5 million a day that Priti Patel was saying this is costing us back then. So I would, I wouldn't even want to guess what the cost will be now. It's going to be a lot more than £5 million a day. And at a time, Mark, we're seeing more and more people coming over. Over the last 3 years, we've been seeing fewer people actually being processed. So the delays now of getting people processed within 6 months, they've trebled over the Priti Patel year. So they've got to get a handle on this.
Well, it's interesting to me, if you look at the way this situation is presented in the newspapers, that's why I like to actually look at the numbers, because everything very quickly takes on the air of an intractable problem. Thousands and thousands of people just coming across the channel. It's just the way it is. Yet it wasn't the way it was 4 years ago. It's weird that we get used, in a strange way, we just get used to it so quickly as a permanent fact of life that no politician can do anything about.
No, that is exactly that, Mark. And obviously they tried the Rwanda plan, which is kind of stuck in the court at the moment. I think the French have been trying to kind of stab dinghies over in France to stop people coming across as well. You know, they're trying all of these things. It's probably worth just saying that, you know, these numbers are relatively small. They're obviously costing us a fortune because when these migrants come across, they have to be home, they have to be fed. Whereas obviously those who are coming over kind of through legitimate means, when you're coming through the airports and actually here to work or to come and stay with family, they're obviously paying for themselves. And the numbers are relatively small when we look at that. We do know, Mark, if we look at the ONS figures, that between 2011 and 2021, if you're looking at kind of what you would class as the more general migration, the population rose 3.5 million, and we had 2 million of that was migration. So we've seen about 200,000. So we talk about these numbers here. We've got about 200,000 a year over the last decade of net migration. So these numbers are small compared to that, but they do add, you know, a huge burden in terms of cost to the taxpayer.
Well, I mentioned on this subject just a couple of days ago that people aren't very numerate. So, for example, this year, for the first time ever, the government handed out over 1 million legal immigration visas to people. And that 1 million is a number that ordinary people can grasp because it's a big number. It's a city the size of Birmingham. And where are you going to put the city the size of Birmingham? I mean, these numbers cause immense pressures on almost every aspect of life when they're on that scale, don't they?
No, of course. So yeah, they've issued kind of for 1 million more people to come in. Remember, a lot of people do actually leave as well. So the net numbers per year over the last decade has been 200,000. But it does add a lot of pressures because we know we haven't had a new reservoir for 30 years. The population's gone up quite significantly for that. The migration's coming in, but we're not seeing that infrastructure. Now, migration, Mark, can actually help the country in a way because we've actually, if you look at the birth rate, we're not actually having enough births to replace the number of people who are dying in the country. And the immigrants who are coming in generally are of age about 25 to 64. So they are more of working age and they do come in and pay the taxes. But I think when people were talking about getting control of the borders through Brexit, what we've actually seen in more recent years, Mark, actually, is the net immigration coming into the country is not EU nationals, actually. It's non-EU nationals, which you could say we've had control in terms of who could come in from those countries overall. And if you look at the job market, we've seen about 500,000 more people over the last year in work. That's slightly more kind of UK born than non-UK born. But then of those who are kind of non-UK born, again, 85% of that is from outside of the EU as well. So this isn't one of those situations where it's all EU people come in, it's non-EU as well.
Well, let me just pick up on what you said about the collapsed fertility rate in the UK, which is true. The last numbers were fairly spectacular on that, in that huge numbers of people just aren't bothering to have babies anymore, perhaps because it's too expensive, perhaps because they can't afford a house or a flat big enough to raise a family in. Who knows? Who knows why it is? But isn't the solution to that actually to cure the problem with people not having babies and get them to have more babies? You're Welsh, Jamie. I mean, is Wales just like Gate 37 at Heathrow Airport? It just happens to be a collective expression of whoever happens to be standing around in it? Or is Wales the home of the Welsh people?
Well, Wales what you tend to find in Wales, Mark, because it's historically the last few years been cheaper than England, you kind of get people coming from England over to Wales. I don't think Mark Draper's too happy with the invasion of the English there. But you're right. If we had the infrastructure, then it would be much, much better because people are putting off having children because they can't afford the homes. You want a home to actually bring your children up. So if we had more homes, it's all very well having 200,000 net migration, Mark. But if you haven't got the doctors, if you haven't got kind of the infrastructure, the roads, the reservoirs, the energy supply, it just pushes the costs up for everybody else. And that means that it does have an impact on people's lives. And you've got to basically, if you're going to accept the migration that's coming in, you've got to build the infrastructure to work around that as well.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it, Jamie. I'm not sure you can actually do that with something like the NHS. I think it's more likely that instead of waiting 2 years to see that cancer specialist, you'll be waiting 4, 5, 7 years. Who knows how long it will be. But thank you very much, Jamie. These are fascinating numbers. And it's worth remembering when these politicians tell you they can't do anything about the Channel migrations. It was nothing just 4 years ago. It's risen on this government's watch, and the next Prime Minister needs to take ownership of it and end it.